Thanks for joining us, Steven, today, and here in this beautiful city of Bangalore. So just to begin with, if you can share a bit about what Quest Alliance does, and what does your role intake in the organization currently?
Thanks for having me here and welcome to Bangalore. Quest Alliance is an organization works in the space of skilling. And maybe I'll try and give you an analogy that is more relatable. So if you think about, when you were in school and you had to make this choice of what do I study next, right? And for most of us, it was art, science, and commerce. And then once you were there, then it was about what do I do next? Do I do engineering, medicine, design? And when you're typically in that space, then you ask your peers, you ask your parents, and you have the opportunity of exposure to speak to different people, right? Most of us are, right? But there's an entire universe of people who don't necessarily have that access, right? And therefore, sometimes the decisions that they make are not necessarily informed. And then, as a result of that, they end up in a space where they feel like the choices that they have made are not really where they want to be in life. So this gap that exists, right? The intent of the organization is really to try and bridge that gap, so that at the end of the day, the idea is to take and help these young people make more informed life choices, such that they have a thriving career. That's the intent.
Nice. And what does your role kind of, come into the picture in this whole equation?
So I'm part of the product team as an organization, and I'm quite happy to say that this year, as part of a new 5-year strat, we are starting to look at program and product in a more integrated fashion. Historically, it was an auxiliary component, but now when we're looking at designing, we're looking how to integrate both of these two so that they can be mutually beneficial to each other.
Great. Like you managed, there's this access issue with a lot of cities in the hinterlands in the country itself where people don't have access to information. But on the other side, there's also this whole overload of information when you talk about skilling, when you talk about education, when you talk about things students would want to aspire to do. So how is it that Quest Alliance is using tech to, one, validate what is really relevant for those students that you're reaching out to?
Yeah.
And second, once validated, how do you make sure that whatever is being now taken to those students is something that makes sense in the trajectory of their lives?
I think that's a very valuable question to ask to start off with. On one hand, I will say that it's a problem of many, because there are many organizations trying to sort of solve this problem. So that's one side of the story. But when it comes to like being able to access so much information and how do you sort of sift through information that's most relevant to you, I think for us, from a product standpoint, we try to lead with affinities to try and recognize where the learner is at. For example, if you feel that you want your end objective is to have a thriving career, right? But what are some of the fundamental building blocks that you need to have a thriving career? And say, for example, a job is one such element, right? So if you're going into a space where the demographic requires employment, then you probably want to lead with employment and make that experience of interacting with employment a lot more engaging. For example, don't do what traditional like job portals do, right? Where there's a plethora of information and you're not able to really assess and position where you sit in that, right? Can you simplify that experience where, if I may call it like gamification, where like the call to actions are more intuitive, right? So like one thing that we tried to do was get inspired by dating world apps, and so then you showcase like these images of like different kinds of jobs, and say that either I like this job, I don't dislike this, or I dislike this job, and you go through a series of job cards like that, and then you have like a persona, like you have a sense that this learner is interested in, say, services kind of jobs, right? And then you sort of build from there.
Great. And talking about education as a sector in general in the social space is heavily funded. And like you also alluded to that fact where, a lot of organizations are trying to break this ice around skilling and education and where it fits for this individual to be, aspiring what is possible. So what is it that right now you are at in terms of the tech process to kind of enable this and also what the organizations buy in that entire process of how much is tech important, should be funded too much? Because initially most of these education and tech interventions have been offline, on ground. And now that we're digitizing most of it, the funding is flowing towards that. So what's the organization's viewpoint, one, on, say, funding these interventions and in tech processes?
So I think that's actually been like a really interesting story. Quest has been around for like 18 years, and I've been around for 5. And so a lot of this is anecdotal, and I've just heard stories about this. But in the early days of like, how do we do things better, right? That's where a lot of this stems from, right? So you don't lead with tech saying, there's AI, I need to use AI. That's not the way you sort of solve for problems. So anyways, there was a time where Quest used to, have people on like motorbikes carrying like TVs and like VCRs and going to like different parts of the village, and would sort of use that as like dissemination mediums, right? So there has been like an inclination to be forward thinking in terms of how do we leverage technology to sort of solve for our problem as an organization. And we've tried to stay, in tune with how fast tech is changing. It's hard to do that, but we try and do our best. That has been in many ways a part of like the organization's DNA. I think right now it's not only a Quest thing. I think there has been like a lot of evolution from a funding perspective also about how different, say, CSR folks are also looking at how we can use technology to leverage or to benefit, say, program design, right? And that has also in many ways led to an impetus for us to also think about this idea of integrating program and product. Yeah, and I think right now a fair amount of energy in the organization goes into product development. In fact, the 3 major pillars of the organization are mainstreaming, enabling, and innovation. So innovation is tech-enabled innovation.
Great. And what's funded is also scrutinized a lot.
Yeah.
So from your journey in terms of having enabled some of these programs and tools in that segment, what's been some learnings comparing it to the offline element of it versus what it is right now as online, or any anecdotes or instances that you can share where tech has really improved or upscaled whatever's been delivered right now?
I think from a measurement perspective, technology definitely gives you a wider dimensionality and easier access to data, right? And once you have that data, your ability, or I think the way you think about monitoring and evaluation also like evolves. Today, like for example, in the sector, a lot of people are looking at impact beyond outreach. There was a time where impact was outreach, but now impact is really about what is that shift that we're creating, right? And to that effect, like many different organizations are starting to look to use tech to sort of solve those problems, right? Like, so for example, in the learning space, access, engagement, learning, or like lesson completion are the proxies for impact, right? But I think with time, we're starting to realize that those are proxies that are not necessarily indicative of learning happening, right? And the way you try and do this is you layer this at multiple different spaces. So for example, a very simple example would be that if you have learning content that's 5 minutes long, what is the behavior that your learner is showing around that content? Are they demonstrating like rage clicks, or are they bouncing a lot from there? If something's 5 minutes long, are they spending, say, 30 seconds, or are they spending 10 minutes? So you use metrics like that to start to qualify the experience that they're having, right? And I think what's happening right now for us as an organization as well, for us to be able to say that our products are actually creating an impact and they're actually useful and meaningful for the lives of our learners, it's important for us to start looking at measurability from that lens. And I don't think we've cracked it yet, but there is like directionality towards that space.
Great. Like you also mentioned that there's a lot more breadth into what the outreach aspect of it was before, because numbers is what you put in reports, the funders like here. But right now, with the advent of more technological instances or references that you can put into a program, there's more depth as well. So they're going wide in terms of the outreach as well, and also what the learner, like a specific learner persona, you can drill down on what is really required.
Yeah.
And with AI, that's even kind of further supported, where a teacher is not required. So they couldn't just send a chat message. A chatbot could kind of enable that for a learner at a very personalized level.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on AI right now? And is AI something that you're integrating? And if you can then kind of share your experiences with it.
Yeah. I think just as a philosophy for us, the idea is to really speak to the needs of a learner, right? And this means that if you have a classroom of 60 learners, you're likely looking at 60 different specific problems to solve, right? Because we recognize that no two learners are the same, right? And this is really like hyper localization at scale, right? Which is like a universal problem to solve. And for us, really, as far as the idea of personalization or product development is concerned, that's really our North Star metric, right? How do you crack hyper localization at scale? AI is significantly helpful there just because of its ability to, I think, number one, look at such large volumes of data and to be able to assimilate very pointed, meaningful information. That's one, right? The other is with the kind of AI that we have today is its ability to understand natural language, which is why I think the world has just gone crazy about like LLMs and everything, that every second conversation is about LLMs, is because it's become so much more humanized, right? And I think if you have the ability to amalgamate these two aspects, right, like look at vast amounts of data that really represent the universe of your learner, and that assimilate that information into something that's meaningful and tangible and palatable for the learner, you've got something there. And I think a lot of organizations are trying to ride that wave, and I don't think we've really cracked it, right? But there's a lot of promise there.
But any thoughts for an organization who's looking to dabble into AI right now? From an ethics standpoint, like because there has to be some guardrailing, gatekeeping to what is possible. Like LLMs could just limit the information it's fetching from rather than opening it up to the entire internet. So any thoughts on those?
Well, I mean, to start with, there are checks and balances and policies and procedures and processes that are typically put into place, right?
Yep.
And so that's one level of scaffolding, and how well you're able to use that scaffolding kind of in many ways determines how safe your algorithms are. And there's a fair amount of like evolution there, even like at a national level right now, right? We've got multiple incubation centers, like Digital Futures Lab has put out some amazing work. Tattle's working on this, right? So there are spaces that we're doing this. We're also doing this as a nation, right, from the government side. So, I mean, but that's one aspect of it. But I think more, if from an organizational standpoint, I think you don't typically start there, right? Most people start with the excitement of what it can solve for.
Okay.
And like software development, there is kind of like an AI development life cycle, and responsibility is one such aspect of that life cycle. And I think it's just important to be aware that at some point in your journey, before you take it to the end user, that it is safe for your context. And yeah, that's probably the simplest way to sort of look at responsibility.
Nice. And talk about the journey part of it. So where is Quest Alliance in its journey right now? And is there a vision for, say, next 5 years of tech, AI, or anything else that you're looking to integrate into the current programs?
Yeah. So we've been dabbling in like multiple different forms of AI. Like earlier forms of AI for us were like in the monitoring and evaluation space, which was, say, statistical modeling to see some amount of like cause and effect, traditional algorithms like linear regression. So we have, kind of worked in spaces like that. And of course, now a lot of our products are seeing a lot of inspiration from LLMs, and we're still in our early days of the kind of problems that we want to solve for. It's hyper exciting, the problem statements that we have. In terms of what the vision is, I think from a product standpoint, I think we strongly believe that it's very useful to leverage from the power of community, right? If there are 5 organizations who've already cracked, a certain problem, then it makes sense to go and have a conversation with them before you decide to solve the problem from scratch again, right? And whatever that may be, right? Even if it's idea sharing all the way to like, say, platform sharing, right? I think that porousness between organizations is, I think it's critical, because in many ways, the ultimate KPI that all of us in the sector are working towards is human development, right? So yeah, I think that's the hope.
Great. And brilliant, actually. On that collaborative note, we'll end the conversation here. Thank you so much, Steven. It's been brilliant talking to you. And hopefully, wish the best for Quest Alliance.
Thank you.
Thank you.